Welcome to one of the smallest, most remote, and most remarkable countries on the face of this earth. Today, we are exploring the Republic of the Marshall Islands, a tiny Pacific nation of enormous historical significance, extraordinary natural beauty, and heartbreaking modern vulnerability. The Marshall Islands is officially known as the Republic of the Marshall Islands and sits in the Central Pacific Ocean, within the vast region known as Micronesia, which is part of the broader area of Oceania. The capital city and largest urban center of the country is Majuro, which is also the political, economic, and cultural heart of the nation. With a population of only around 42,000 to 45,000 people, the Marshall Islands is one of the least populated sovereign nations in the world, and with a total land area of just 181 square kilometers, it is also one of the smallest by landmass. And yet, despite the tiny footprint of dry land, the Marshall Islands claims an exclusive economic zone that stretches across more than 750,000 square miles of open ocean, making it a nation where the water is far more dominant than the earth, where the horizon is always just a few hundred meters away in any direction, and where the relationship between the people and the sea is not a metaphor but the literal foundation of every aspect of life. The currency used in the Marshall Islands is the United States dollar, and the country sits in the UTC plus 12 time zone, placing it among the first places on earth to greet each new day. The geography of the Marshall Islands is unlike almost any other country in the world. Rather than a single landmass or even a handful of islands, the Marshall Islands is composed of 29 coral atolls and 5 individual islands, which together contain over 1,000 small islets scattered across that enormous expanse of ocean. An atoll, for those unfamiliar with the term, is a ring-shaped coral reef or chain of coral islands that encircles a central lagoon, and the atolls of the Marshall Islands are among the most beautiful and most geologically fragile landforms on Earth. The islands are organized into 2 parallel chains running roughly northwest to southeast across the Pacific. The eastern chain is called the Ratak chain, meaning the sunrise chain, and the western chain is called the Ralik chain, meaning the sunset chain. And together they contain some of the most important and historically significant atolls in the entire Pacific region. Among the most notable atolls are Bikini Atoll, Kwajalein Atoll, and Enewetak Atoll, each of which carries a weight of history that extends far beyond the small dots they represent on any map of the Pacific Ocean. The climate of the Marshall Islands is tropical throughout the year, hot and humid, with a typhoon season running from July through November that brings the constant threat of powerful storms sweeping across these low-lying islands. And when we say low-lying, we mean it in the most literal and alarming sense possible. The average elevation of the Marshall Islands is approximately 2 meters above sea level, making it one of the lowest-lying countries on Earth and one of the most immediately threatened by the rising seas driven by global climate change. The people of the Marshall Islands are predominantly Micronesian, specifically Marshallese, and they speak 2 official languages, Marshallese and English. The majority of the population is concentrated in 2 main locations, Majuro, the capital, and Ebeye, a densely populated island on Kwajalein Atoll that is sometimes described as one of the most overcrowded places in the Pacific. The people of the Marshall Islands are overwhelmingly Christian, with Protestant denominations forming the majority, a legacy of the missionary activity that accompanied Western contact in the 19th century. One of the most significant and often overlooked facts about the Marshallese people is their unique relationship with the United States, which we will discuss in detail shortly. But one of its most important practical consequences is that a significant portion of the Marshallese population lives not in the Marshall Islands at all, but in the United States, particularly in communities in Hawaii, Arkansas, and other states, where they have relocated in search of economic opportunity and, increasingly, in response to the environmental threats facing their home islands. The Marshallese diaspora in the United States is a living testament to both the deep ties between the 2 countries and the pressures that are pushing people away from one of the most beautiful and fragile places in the world. To understand the Marshall Islands fully, you have to understand its history, and that history is one of the most consequential and in some ways most tragic stories in the modern Pacific. The islands were originally settled by Micronesian peoples thousands of years ago, and the Marshallese developed a sophisticated seafaring culture uniquely adapted to life on low coral atolls, with remarkable navigational traditions, a complex social structure organized around clans and chiefs, and a deep knowledge of the ocean and the living world of the reef. European contact began in the 16th century, with Spanish explorers passing through the region, and the islands were later charted more systematically by British and Russian navigators, including the British captain John Marshall, after whom the islands are named. Germany established formal colonial control over the Marshall Islands in 1885, incorporating them into German New Guinea, and German rule lasted until the First World War, when Japan seized the islands and subsequently administered them under a League of Nations mandate. Japanese rule transformed the Marshall Islands significantly, bringing Japanese settlers, military installations, and infrastructure And during the Second World War, the islands became an important theater of conflict as American forces advanced across the Pacific, capturing Kwajalein Atoll and other key positions in some of the most intense fighting of the Pacific Campaign. After the war, the United States assumed administration of the Marshall Islands under a United Nations trusteeship. And it was during this period of American administration that the most devastating chapter in Marshallese history took place. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States conducted 67 nuclear weapons tests at two sites in the Marshall Islands, Bikini Atoll and Eniwetok Atoll. These tests included some of the most powerful nuclear explosions ever detonated, among them the Castle Bravo hydrogen bomb test of 1954, which produced an explosion far larger than anticipated and spread radioactive fallout across a wide area of the Pacific, contaminating nearby atolls and their populations, including the people of Rongelap Atoll, who were exposed to severe radiation and suffered profound health consequences as a result. The residents of both Bikini Atoll and Eniwetok Atoll were forcibly relocated from their home islands before the testing began, told by American officials that they were being asked to make a temporary sacrifice for the good of humanity, a promise that has never truly been honored. The people of Bikini Atoll, in particular, have been unable to return permanently to their home atoll to this day, as the soil and the food chain remain contaminated by residual radioactivity. The health consequences of the nuclear testing program, including elevated rates of cancer, thyroid disease, and birth defects among affected populations, have been documented extensively and continue to affect the descendants of those who were exposed. The United States has provided some compensation to affected communities over the decades, but many Marshallese and their advocates argue that the compensation has been wholly inadequate relative to the scale of the harm done. Bikini Atoll was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2010, recognized for its historical significance as a site of nuclear testing and its ongoing importance as a symbol of the nuclear age, though that recognition brings little comfort to the people who were displaced and harmed. The Marshall Islands achieved independence from United States administration in 1986, becoming a fully sovereign nation with its own government and its own seat at the United Nations. The government of the Marshall Islands is a parliamentary republic, with a president who serves as both head of state and head of government, and a legislature known as the Nitiyela, which is the Marshallese word for parliament. The relationship between the Marshall Islands and the United States, however, did not end with independence. Instead, the two countries entered into a compact of free association known as COFA, which structures a relationship of close cooperation and mutual benefit. Under the Compact of Free Association, the United States provides substantial financial assistance to the Marshall Islands government, retains the right to use certain military facilities in the islands, most notably the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site at Kwajalein Atoll, which is used for missile testing and space operations, and in return, citizens of the Marshall Islands are permitted to live, work, and study in the United States without the need for a visa. This free movement provision is enormously significant in practice, as it has allowed large numbers of Marshallese to relocate to the United States, and it reflects the unique and complex bond between the two nations that has been shaped by war, by nuclear testing, by economic dependence, and by decades of close interaction. The economy of the Marshall Islands is small, open, and heavily dependent on external assistance. The largest single source of income for the government is financial aid from the United States under the Compact of Free Association, which has been the primary support for public services, infrastructure, and government operations since independence. Beyond this, the main economic activities include the sale of fishing licenses to foreign fishing fleets, particularly for tuna fishing, in the rich waters of the Marshallese Exclusive Economic Zone, the production and export of copra, which is dried coconut meat used in the production of coconut oil and various other products, and the economic activity associated with the United States military presence at Kwajalein Atoll. Tourism exists in the Marshall Islands, but is extremely limited by the remoteness of the islands, the limited infrastructure, and the lack of international air connections, though the country does attract a small number of visitors interested in diving, fishing, and the extraordinary natural beauty of the atolls and lagoons. The Marshall Islands also derive some income from ship registration, operating what is known as an open registry that allows ships from around the world to fly the Marshallese flag for a fee. And this flag of convenience arrangement has made the Marshall Islands one of the largest ship registries in the world by tonnage, which is a somewhat surreal fact for a country of 40,000 people with almost no merchant navy of its own. Daily life in the Marshall Islands reflects the realities of a small, remote island nation with limited resources and strong community ties. Most people live simply, with fishing and small-scale subsistence farming forming the basis of food production, supplemented by imported foods that account for a large portion of the diet. The dependence on imported food has contributed to serious public health challenges, including high rates of diabetes, obesity, and related conditions, as traditional diets, high in fresh fish and local produce, have been partly displaced by processed and imported foods that are cheaper and more readily available. Infrastructure in the Marshall Islands is limited. Access to clean water, reliable electricity, quality health care, and higher education are all more challenging than in larger, wealthier nations. The College of the Marshall Islands in Majuro provides higher education opportunities locally, and the public education system provides schooling through the secondary level. But many young Marshallese seek further education and better economic opportunities in the United States, contributing to a brain drain that the country struggles to address. Healthcare services are similarly limited, with the Marshall Islands facing not only the challenges of providing modern medical care in a remote island setting, but also the long shadow of nuclear testing history, which continues to create elevated health needs in affected communities. The environmental situation facing the Marshall Islands is one of the most urgent and poignant in the world. As a nation whose highest point is only a few meters above sea level and whose entire landmass consists of low coral atolls and islands, the Marshall Islands is on the absolute front line of climate change and rising seas. Scientific projections suggest that without dramatic reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions, large portions of the Marshall Islands could become uninhabitable within decades due to saltwater intrusion into freshwater supplies, increased flooding from storm surges, coastal erosion, and the bleaching and degradation of the coral reefs that form the very foundation of the atolls themselves. The Marshallese government has been one of the most vocal and passionate advocates on the world stage for urgent climate action, with leaders repeatedly calling out the wealthy industrialized nations whose emissions are driving the changes that threaten to make the Marshall Islands disappear beneath the waves. This is not a distant or theoretical threat for the Marshallese people. It is a present reality, with king tides already flooding homes and roads, freshwater lenses shrinking, and some outer islands already showing signs of severe erosion. The Marshall Islands also continues to deal with the legacy of nuclear contamination, with parts of Bikini Atoll and Eniwetok Atoll remaining uninhabitable or restricted due to residual radioactivity, and a concrete dome built by the United States on Eniwetok Atoll to contain nuclear waste now showing signs of cracking and leaking, raising serious concerns about further contamination of the surrounding ocean. To close with some of the most striking facts about this extraordinary little nation, the Marshall Islands is one of the smallest countries in the world by both population and land area, yet it controls one of the largest ocean territories of any nation on Earth. It uses the United States dollar as its currency, despite being a fully independent sovereign nation. Its nuclear testing history, which saw 67 atomic and thermonuclear weapons detonated on its atolls between 1946 and 1958, has left permanent scars on its people, its land, and its collective memory. Its average elevation of just 2 meters above sea level makes it one of the nations most immediately threatened by the rising seas of a warming world. And through all of this, the Marshallese people have maintained their culture, their language, their extraordinary seafaring traditions, and their fierce love for the islands and the ocean that have defined their identity for thousands of years. The story of the Marshall Islands is a story about resilience in the face of forces far larger than any one small nation can control. And it is a story that the rest of the world would do well to listen to carefully, because the Marshall Islands is not merely a victim of history and of climate change. It is a mirror held up to the rest of the world, showing us the consequences of our choices and reminding us that behind every statistic and every scientific projection, there are real people, real communities, and a real culture worth fighting to preserve. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching.